Hey guys, it's Tammy Dunnett, your host of the Leadership Communication Expo, bringing you access to leading experts who are giving you simple, actionable, step-by-step strategies so you can fully embrace the leader you are meant to be, master conflict resolution, and create engaging and inclusive teams. Today with me, I have Anthony Taylor, the CEO and founder of 359, which I'm going to come back to that title in a moment, by the way. Anthony runs 359, a mental skills consultancy that specializes in equipping people and teams with the mental skills needed to thrive in today's world. They focus on developing personal and leadership performance through mental fitness and their Essential Manager program. And today we're talking about what is mental toughness and why is it important to communication. Welcome, Anthony.
Well, thank you very much, Tammy. Great to be on today's, having our conversation today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. I have to say, when I first saw the title of your organization called 359, here's my image. It was about white knuckling it, thinking of mental toughness, white knuckling it to 4 o'clock. You know, it's 3:59, the clock is about to tick, but that's actually not where you got the inspiration.
It's not, it is to do with the clock, but it's to do with Roger Bannister, of course, who broke the 4-minute mile. And if anyone knows the story about that, he needed to display a lot of mental toughness over the preceding sort of years to get to that point. And then, of course, just by doing that, he changed the mindset of the entire world as to what was possible. And then, of course, we know lots of other people very quickly also broke the 4-minute mind barrier. So he really was the inspiration behind the name for my business, because that's what we do.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating. And speaking of mental toughness, I think it's a topic worthy of exploration because there's kind of a love-hate with mental toughness, especially when we have all the mental health awareness. So talk to us a little bit about what is mental toughness and why it's important to talk about this.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're quite right. It's quite in the UK, we call it a Marmite term. So if anyone knows Marmite, it's a very polarizing spread you put on your toast, a bit like Vegemite the Australians have, and you either love it or hate it. And it's the same with mental toughness. A lot of people think it's got this macho image. It's about being tough and being hard. It's all about big biceps and pushing through the pain, and it really isn't. Mental toughness is a plastic personality trait that explains how we respond mentally to stress, pressure, and challenge. And it looks at how we think. A lot of other models, Myers-Briggs, DISC, everything else are really valuable, but they look at our behaviors. Mental toughness looks at what we think. And of course, what we know is that our thoughts and our thinking drives our behavior. So it's really important because it looks at the stage before behavior and it gives us insight. So that's really what mental toughness is.
Okay, that's fascinating. And it's having me reflect back on my military days, because when you have a group of people all suffering together, there seems to be this synergistic mental toughness that comes out of that. Like, we are going to pull together, we're going to make this work. Otherwise, we're all going to perish. And we actually can't even afford to have 1 or 2 people kind of fall down that mental rabbit hole.
Yes, absolutely. And that it can really be really helpful in a group setting. But what's interesting about mental toughness, and very quickly an overview of the model. So the model, there are different models. The most robust and well researched over, and it's been put together over 30 years of multidisciplinary approach from health academia, but also from sports psychology and the practitioner side, is the 4 C's model that we use. And that is 4 C's of control, commitment, challenge, and confidence. And control has got 2 subscales: our emotional control and our life control. The degree to which we feel we're in control of our emotions and able to show them, and the degree to which we feel in control of our lives and take action steps with that. Commitment is around goal orientation and goal achievement, delivery orientation. Do we set goals and do we stick at them until we achieve them? And then challenge is around our mindset. Are we willing to stretch ourselves, get out of our comfort zone? Do we have a growth mindset, which many of our listeners will have heard about? And how do we see failure? Do we learn from these things, or do we fail to grasp that learning? And then lastly, we've got confidence, interpersonal confidence. So the degree to which we feel we're able to put our point of view forward, have constructive debate, have challenge, have constructive conflict, and then of course confidence in our abilities. So that's the overall model of mental toughness. Why it's so important in terms of communication is that, as we've talked about, you have people who are high levels in mental toughness and people who are more mentally sensitive. And they're going to think very, very differently. And that will therefore influence how they will communicate, how teams function, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so I want to pick apart a little bit of that, because when you were talking about control of emotion, and again, I was thinking back to the experience of being in the military. How comfortable are you to express emotion? I don't know if we were comfortable to all say out loud, we're struggling, this sucks, I don't want to do it. We had to keep that kind of inside, internal, so that we could collectively come together in order for that commitment to the goal. So I'm actually wondering, how closely connected is being able to express freely your emotion, or is it more about being selective about the emotions you express?
I think it's the latter, because actually you make a really good analogy, a good point there, Tammy. Often what we find with people who are mentally tough, and that group that you were working with there clearly were, is that they can be hard to read for other people. They are able to choose what emotions they show, and often don't show a lot. So to other people who are more mentally sensitive, they can come across as quite cold because you can't read them. So it's so important that mental toughness on its own, or high levels of mental toughness, excuse me, can cause problems just as much as mental sensitivity can, without self-awareness and without emotional intelligence. That understanding of our own emotions, what they mean, how we're feeling, and to what degree we want to show those to other people.
Yeah. So is it safe to say that a part of mental toughness then is kind of filtering through what's going to be helpful in this situation to bring everyone together to achieve a goal? Or is this more about just being authentic and feeling comfortable to just express everything you need to say in order to feel included and valued? Or maybe it's neither.
I think, yes, an interesting thing. I think it's that understanding of where do you sit on that spectrum. Are you overplaying some of your mental toughness strengths sometimes, or are you underplaying them? And it's best to think about them in that way. A lot of people think, oh, I don't want to be labeled as I'm a mentally tough or mentally sensitive. It's on a spectrum, and equally you can move up and down that spectrum. So somebody who's more mentally sensitive can learn to flex their style to think a little bit more like somebody who's more mentally tough. We can develop that. Somebody who's mentally tough can learn through emotional intelligence and understanding to flex their style and flex their mental toughness according to the situation.
It sounds like flexing is part of the dance. It seems to be in every relationship. It's like, how do we communicate? How do we interact? How do we share our boundaries? Like all those pieces. And this is now kind of the next level of the dance between two people or a group of people to find the right balance.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so important. I've been working with this model now for 10 years. I've worked with teams and individuals in many scenarios. A common one, and an example I use a lot, is an individual who we were asked to coach this person. They were a new director in the business. They'd been there about 6 months, and everything had gone well at the start, and they were there to improve the performance of this director. And actually what happened in about 6 months, performance was going the other way. So we went in, we had a chat, we assessed that individual and their team, and what we realized was that this person was off the charts. They were 8, 9, and 10. And when we measure mental toughness, we measure it on a STEM scale of 1 to 10, 1 being mentally sensitive and 10 on there. Most people, the average, 68% of the population, of any population, and we've measured well over 200,000 people over the years, is about 5.5. That's the global average for mental toughness. Anything above 8 or above is in the top 16%, and anything in 1 to 3 is the bottom end. This individual was 8, 9, and 10s. The rest of his team was much more like the average or below average, so somewhere between 3 and 5. And that was the problem. This individual was, came across as a bit of a cold fish, didn't communicate very well. People couldn't read him, so they couldn't trust him if they can't read him, was incredibly driven, in engaging in lots of new initiatives, lots of, we're going to do this, and changes to processes and things like that, moving much faster than the rest of his team could cope with. High interpersonal confidence, so very opinionated and very comfortable putting his opinions forward, and high lacking in his confidence and abilities. High in his confidence and abilities, so didn't think for a second that actually others might have a different opinion or something else to add. And that was the problem. He was burning his team out and losing connection. So what we needed to do was coach him around some emotional intelligence, explain how his team were thinking differently, and what were the merits of having a team that are slightly different to him in terms of mental toughness levels. What are the benefits to people who might be a little bit more reticent. Once he started to do that and understand that, then actually things started to improve. He could learn to show a little bit more emotion and engage his people.
So it sounds like connection. You hit on a key word for me. It's one of my favorite words. Connection is really at the heart of developing your mental toughness and finding that right balance. And sounds like that's the benefit for leaders.
Yes, very much. Understanding how they think in these four key areas, and each one's got two subscales. So you're actually looking at 8 key areas, and then understanding how their teams may be thinking based on their profile. So another example, I'm just working with a drinks brand at the minute. They're only about 18 people strong, but they are sort of a founder-led business. But there's a clear distinction between the mental toughness of their senior management team of 7 people and the rest of the business by about 2.5 scores. And this is causing some of the problems. So, I've been working with them. There's a little bit of a lack of psychological safety because of this disconnection in the mental toughness levels. The founder is brilliant, highly motivated, inspiring individual. But what I've seen from his scores is great at starting new initiatives, but actually lacking in follow through. So again, it's a typical or fairly typical sort of founder type profile of an entrepreneur. And again, it's understanding that can cause problems.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm smiling and laughing because I'm like, oh, that sounds like me.
Yes, I'm very similar. I'm great out the gate and useless in the long run. So I need to get people around me that are good at that.
It actually made me wonder about levels of ownership. When you made the distinction between, the leadership and then those who are not in the leadership, how much does ownership of an outcome or a goal or an objective influence mental toughness?
I think the ownership bit can be really important. One thing about the model, and I think the model is absolutely brilliant, but just like any model, it does have its gaps. And I think for me, often sitting at the heart of mental toughness in that central model could be values and purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're really clear about your values and your purpose and that sort of reason, that why, then actually often I think that allows us to really develop or use more mental toughness. Without that, it can be a bit different. So I don't know if that answered your question or where you were going with it, but
yeah, no, I think connecting it to the values makes a whole lot of sense. And when people can get around a goal, like I go back then to the military experience where we're all out in the woods and we have to like survive overnight and hunt people down and all that kind of fun stuff. And it sucks. Our goal is what kept us unified. And
yes.
After it was all done, that's when we could let the human part of us show, because we could laugh about it. We could say, oh my God, you have no idea how terrified I was back there, but I couldn't tell you because it would have taken away from our mission.
Yes.
And so I almost feel like that emotional, I think you'd mentioned about how comfortable we are with showing emotions and the control of our emotions. As with anything in your model, this is all a continuum and it swings up and down depending on what's needed for that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So using your military analogy, I think that's a great one. Being really focused on the goal. What are we trying to achieve here? What's our objective? And why is that important to us? Is going to show high goal orientation. Would you have, dealt with the bad weather and the cold and the rain and all and discomfort of being out in the woods at night if you hadn't been highly goal orientated? No, you might have seen some people that were great out of the gate actually, but their delivery orientation there, in terms of achieving that, their achievement orientation might have been lacking. So they're the ones that might have been great for the first 2 or 3 hours, but when things get soggy and the feet get cold and it's miserable, they're the ones that, well, let's stay in bed a bit longer, let's not do that. So having high achievement orientation is equally important, because you can have people that are great setting goals but don't follow through.
Yeah.
And sometimes in a team, you need people that are maybe the ones setting the goals, and you need other people that are going to be the ones that are really committed to achieving it.
Yeah. So is that one of the leaders' role then, is to continually reassess where people are at in terms of their mental fitness, their mental health, their mental toughness? Sorry, added mental health.
Yeah.
Their mental toughness along the continuum of a project, and always continually check in and see what they need to adjust and rein people back into the values and the goals?
I think so. I think it's that understanding of, let's look at, you need one of the things I like about mental toughness as well is, quite rightly, equality and diversity is a big thing at the minute. And lots of organizations are putting focus on that. Where I think they're lacking is, equality and diversity around, gender and sexuality and color and all the right things as well. But where's our equality of thought? Where's our identification of thought? How do people think differently? And that's the beauty about mental toughness. So as a leader, I really want to understand what's the makeup of, what's the profile of my team for mental toughness. Who do I know who's got high levels in what areas? Who do I know is maybe a bit more mentally sensitive, or what are their qualities? How can I maximize the natural profile of these individuals to help us move to our goal? So, if you are high in delivery orientation and low on risk, then you might be a great person to say, right, okay, hang on a minute, what are some of the, we want to go ahead in this direction, but what are maybe the risks of that? Because if you've got everyone who's mentally tough, a bit like me, they might go, yeah, that's great, and we're going to run off and we're going to go over a cliff. We're like a bunch of lemmings. We need people who are a bit more mentally risk averse to go, whoa, hang on a minute, Anthony, have you thought about this, that, and the other? And I'm great out the gate and I'll get everyone motivated, but then that's, continuing, that's not my forte. So I'm going to need a really good somebody else who's going to come on, let's keep the process going, let's keep the attention to detail. So knowing the makeup of your team, the psychological makeup of your team through mental toughness can be really important.
And that's the 8 subsections that you had mentioned. So there was the 4 main ones: control, commitment,
challenge and confidence.
Challenge
and then each of those, absolutely. I mean, each of those has 2 subdivisions. So for control, it's emotional and life control. Commitment, it's goal orientation and achievement orientation. Challenge, it's stretching and learning. And then confidence is interpersonal confidence and confidence in abilities.
Perfect. It also sounds like a leader, and you're going to expand on this a little bit more for me, but it sounds like a leader could use this model also to develop learning strategies, development programs. Like if someone is hugely off the chart on one side, but they need a little bit more balance to bring them, kind of robust. It sounds like this could also be used to help create learning objectives.
Absolutely. It's really big in education. It's been proved time and time again. What we know from all the research in many different areas is that mental toughness can determine about as much as 25% difference in performance between people who are more mentally sensitive, or people who are more mentally tough, and those that are more mentally sensitive. So in a learning environment and in an educational environment, it's hugely helpful. A lot of colleges and schools and universities have used it to profile their people and then give them some insight into where they can develop. And a lot of these have stayed on course a lot longer. They've achieved their educational outcomes. In a corporate setting, it's great to be able to do that with people, to understand them, to give them that understanding of where might they need a bit of support. So for someone like me, if I'm embarking on a long program, and the course tutor is aware of my profile, they'll know that I'm probably going to need a bit of G'ing up about a third of the way in to get me through the rest of it. So it's understanding that, and it can be really helpful.
Yeah. So is that why leaders need to learn more about this? Like, is that the founding notion behind why leaders need to know about mental toughness, is just this whole piece about your people may be really strong in some areas, they can wax and wane through them, and being able to identify that to implement strategies to keep them on task?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what I said right near the start of our conversation, which is that this mental toughness explains how people think, certainly when they're under stress, pressure, and challenge. And, so if you can get a better idea into how your people are going to think in certain circumstances, surely as a leader, you'd want to know that. We do Myers-Briggs, we do DISC, we do all the others out there that all look at behaviors. But I think sometimes, they can be useful, don't get me wrong, but sometimes people say, oh, well, it's because I'm a red, that's how I behave that way. Well, that's not really an excuse. So yes, but this looks at how people think. And of course, if you want to change how somebody thinks, you need to understand how they think in the first place. So that's where I think the real benefit comes for leaders.
And so how would leaders identify these traits in their people just from listening to them and their language around challenges?
Yeah, I think how, you can pick up a lot of cues in people's language. So, if people are more mentally sensitive, might use language such as, oh, this always happens to me. I get really annoyed when this happens. I'll never be able to do this. Why does this always happen to me? I can't do that. They're using some of that negative language around why they can't, or why things happen to them, or why they couldn't manage their emotions. You will see that in some of their behaviors as well, in terms of how they might respond to other people in the meeting. So if you've typically got a group of people in a meeting and there's always one or two people contributing and others aren't, the chances are they're the more mentally tough ones, at least in interpersonal confidence. And the others are just thinking, well, I'm not going to bother speaking. They haven't quite, so they might be a bit more low in interpersonal confidence. What's interesting on this, it's a great model to be able to spot who might be experiencing some kind of imposter syndrome too. So people who are great at the gift of the gab and they've got all the repartee and they can talk the talk, but actually often, not always, but can be quite lacking in confidence, and that's classic imposter syndrome. And you can have other people who are great in confidence, really technically minded and know their stuff, but if they're low in interpersonal confidence, you're not going to get to hear their point of view. So as a leader, I'm looking around the room for those kind of clues as well. Who's good at attention to detail? Who finds other people difficult to work with? They might be showing low emotional control because they allow other people to affect their mood very easily. Who might be quite cold, or just comes across as quite cold. I'm working with another leader in a global organization at the minute, and bless him, he really wants to improve, and again, he's very high in mental toughness. So sometimes for him, it can come across as quite arrogant. And even his wife says, you don't really listen, you finish my sentences. He's getting impatient. And that's how he's coming across. So he's really working very hard on his self-awareness to change his communication style based on the work we're doing around this.
That's really interesting. And I love that people can individually make that leap to say, hey, I need to work on something. I don't know what it is yet, but this sounds like this might be the fit for me. There was something you said, and I wrote down the word rejection. How much is rejection tied to this model of mental sensitivity, to mental toughness? Just as you're giving the examples there. So before we move into some strategies leaders can use to maybe balance people out and draw them into the conversation, is rejection a piece of this? Is there a fear that's keeping people in one side or the other?
Well, certainly if we look at the two fundamental causes of all human stress, one of them is the fear of rejection. It's the fear of losing approval. We're a tribal species. We had to work together for most of our time. And if you got kicked out of your tribe, the chances of your survival went down. So you needed to be part of that group. If you got kicked out of your tribe or you were separated, everything was about getting back into it. So fear of rejection is massive. It's hardwired in our DNA. So it can take a lot of emotional control, a lot of mental toughness to overcome that. So this is a great model to work with people in sales teams. A lot of sales trainers, organizations are starting to turn to mental toughness to better be able to understand and support their salespeople to overcome that fear of rejection and work around that and stick to the process and the tasks. So yeah, it definitely, it may explain why somebody who's a bit more mentally sensitive doesn't put themselves in situations where they may experience rejection.
Mm-hmm. And so for those leaders who are listening, because I do want to give them at least something tangible they can use, maybe go back to their team. I suspect for many leaders, having moved up the corporate status, that mental toughness is probably something they feel they are quite good at and have a high level of, whether there's imposter syndrome there or not. And that looking back at their team and at everybody who supports them, that they may struggle with the lack of mental toughness that they're seeing. What's one thing that they can do today to start to either reflect on this or to start asking questions or to help just build awareness around it?
That's a great question. I think spend a little bit of time reflecting on yourself. Try and look at it through, okay, what are the strengths? So you're right, that what we tend to see is typically the higher up an organization goes, the more mentally tough somebody tends to be. So look at their own behaviors and ask for some bits of feedback. Where, how do I come across? How do you perceive me? And think about in each of those four areas around control, commitment, challenge, and confidence, what are the strengths that they may be exhibiting with that? And maybe what might be the downside? How might they be overplaying some of those strengths? So, if someone's got a high challenge, which is high risk, are they overplaying some of that risk? Are they keen to take on too much risk? And rather than look at people who they might find a bit frustrating in terms of because they might be more mentally sensitive, just start to ask themselves, okay, well, what actually might be the benefits of having people who are more mentally sensitive? What can I learn from them? Would be, I think, that first way to do it. And then get an assessment, get it done. It's not very expensive. It's incredibly helpful. You get several reports that explain that with people. get a good coach who's accredited and trained in it to debrief you, and yeah, the learnings really begin from there.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. I think self-awareness, self-reflection is always a good place to start. And then to start to build awareness of others is a second good place to start. So speaking of getting an assessment, you have here that 40 people, so they're going to have to be fast on their keyboards.
They are indeed.
40 people are going to get a complete MTQ4C mental toughness assessment. Talk to us about that a bit.
Yep, so that is an overview assessment that will give you a score in each of those 4 main areas out of 10. It's not the full in-depth MTQ plus, which is 75 measure 1, but it will give you an overall score of your mental toughness and give you a score in each of those 4 areas, and give you a little bit of an insight into things how you may come across and things you might try to do to improve or think about in each of those 4 key areas. So yeah, I'm more than happy to do that for people.
That is amazing. We're going to have a link for that on your speaker page here. So thank you so much for sharing that. Is there anything you'd like to share that I didn't ask about maybe, or leave our viewers with one last tip?
Crikey, no, I think we've covered a great amount of ground in such a short space of time. So I just hope that people have really enjoyed it. I hope it's just piqued people's interest into learning a little bit more about mental toughness. The benefits are, applied. It works in terms of recruitment, it works in team development, team cohesion, collaboration, and certainly around communication. So yeah, there's a lot to be learned, a lot to be gained from learning a bit more about it.
Well, I appreciate that so much. And I certainly have a new perspective, like thinking back on just that example I shared with you in my life when I was thinking about how this would apply. It gave me a new way to look back upon it as well, and to how those factors played a role in our success or our demise. Well, it happens, right? So anyways, thank you so much for being a part of this expo. It's been an absolute delight to host you today.
Well, it's been a pleasure and a privilege. Thank you very much for having me on.
Awesome.